That night, in that cramped, damp little rental room, I took Audrey like a man losing his mind, trying to use the heat of our bodies to fight off the coldness of the world outside. But before the high had even faded, her mother kicked open the already flimsy wooden door and brought people in with her. Icy camera flashes. Cutting insults. They tore apart the last shreds of dignity we had left. A filthy construction worker thinks he's good enough to sleep with my daughter? You can't even give her a roof over her head. Tomorrow, I'm marrying her off to Mr. Silas Draven. For that $300,000, I pushed myself to the breaking point, and as I lay there, barely clinging to life, I watched her toss 3 years of our hard-earned savings onto the hospital bed and say coldly, "We're even now." 3 years later, I came back with a fortune worth billions, ready to make her pay for what she'd done. But in a dark basement, I found her, skin and bones, and beside her, a child whose eyes looked exactly like mine. August in the South felt like being sealed inside a pressure cooker with no way out. In this rundown studio apartment in the old part of the city, even the air felt thick and heavy. The ancient ceiling fan overhead let out a slow, dying creak, but it couldn't push away even a hint of the heat. I had Audrey pinned hard against that iron frame bed, the kind that rattled violently at the slightest movement, like a desperate, caged animal, taking in every inch of warmth her body had to give. Sweat poured down my dark back and dripped onto her pale collarbones, leaving flushed, raw marks across her skin. "Kyle, easy, the bed's going to break." Audrey's long legs were locked tight around my waist. Her voice was breathless, caught somewhere between moans she couldn't hold back and sobs she was trying to swallow. Her nails sank deep into the muscles of my back, dragging red lines through my skin. I didn't stop. I pushed harder. I hated this world. I hated this goddamn poverty. And this, raw, rough, and desperate, was the only way I knew how to claim what little power I had. On her. With her. "You're mine. Audrey Brooks, you're mine asterisk." Asterisk. I bit down on her earlobe, my voice ground down to something raw, like sandpaper dragged across wood. "I'm yours, always." She tilted her head back. Tears slid from the corners of her eyes, mixing with sweat, catching the dim light like broken fragments of glass. We rolled across that narrow bed, the sounds of our bodies colliding sharp and unmistakable in the dead silence of the night. There was something destructive about it. We both knew how cold the world outside that door was, so we burned into each other with everything we had, in this tiny room that was all we had left. And then, just as we both reached the edge, minds going completely blank. Bang. One violent crash. The wooden door, which had barely been holding together to begin with, was kicked in from the outside. It slammed hard into the wall, the impact thundering through the room. The hallway's motion sensor lights snapped on instantly. The harsh white glare cut through the doorway like a blade, slicing into the dark, heat-soaked room. "Ah!" Audrey let out a terrified scream. She shoved me away and snatched the thin, faded blanket, yanking it around her naked body as she scrambled into the corner of the bed, shaking violently. I froze. Blood rushed to my head. On instinct, I grabbed a pair of pants and pulled them on, spinning around with eyes burning red. Standing in the doorway was Audrey's mother. Behind her stood two thick-built families. One of them had his phone raised, the camera flash firing in rapid bursts, click, 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 freezing our most humiliating, most wretched moment in photographs. "Put that down." I roared, lunging forward like an enraged animal, tearing the phone out of his hand and smashing it against the floor. The crack of the screen shattering rang out sharp and clean in the silent room. Smack. Before I could even straighten up, Audrey's mother had already closed the distance. She wound her arm back with full force and slapped me hard across the face. She hit me with everything she had. My eardrum rang. My mouth filled with the taste of blood. "Kyle Hill, you disgusting piece of trash. Have you no shame?" Gloria Brooks jabbed a finger in my face, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ceiling. "A filthy construction worker who can barely scrape together enough to feed himself. What gives you the right to ruin my daughter?" I pressed my hand to my burning cheek, jaw clenched so tight it ached. I said nothing. What was there to say? I was shirtless. I reeked of sour sweat and construction dust that cheap soap couldn't wash out. And Gloria stood there in a silk dress, a designer bag hanging from her wrist. The gap between our worlds had just become a physical thing, a slap across the face, and whatever dignity I had as a man shattered with it. "Mom. What are you doing? Get out." Audrey scrambled off the bed, the blanket still wrapped around her, and threw herself in front of me, screaming at her mother through her tears. "Shut your mouth. I have no daughter as shameless as you." Gloria grabbed Audrey by the hair and dragged her toward the door. "Look at yourself. Living in this pigsty with this broke loser, you can't even afford decent clothes. Mr. Draven has already made it clear, one word from you, and tomorrow he'll buy you a Porsche. A luxury penthouse downtown, your pick. Are you out of your mind, putting yourself through this with a deadbeat like him?" "I won't go. I'd rather die than marry that old man. I love Kyle." Audrey fought back with everything she had. Her pale arms slammed against the iron bed frame, leaving a wide, dark bruise. "Love? Can love afford food on the table? Can love cover a down payment?" Gloria spun around and looked at me like I was a pile of garbage, her eyes filled with a suffocating contempt. Kyle, I'm going to say this once. You want to marry my daughter? Fine. 1 month. Bring me $500,000 for a down payment and buy an apartment downtown. If you can't, get the hell out of her life. And if you ever touch her again, I'll have your legs broken. With that, she reached into her purse, pulled out a stack of photos, and hurled them at my face. The photos scattered across the floor. There I was, hauling bags of cement on a construction site, eating a $5 meal in the scorching sun, kneeling in front of the foreman just to beg for the wages I was owed. Look at yourself. What could you possibly give my daughter? Do you really think you deserve her? Gloria let out a cold laugh, then dragged a screaming, sobbing Audrey out the door. Bang. The door slammed shut. The tiny rented room fell silent again. The air still carried the faint, lingering warmth from the intimacy we'd shared, but my heart had plunged into a bottomless pit of ice. I slowly crouched down and picked up the photo of me kneeling. My fingers trembled, completely out of my control. $500,000. Those words hit me like a mountain caving in on my spine, crushing me completely that I didn't sleep that night. I sat there shirtless on the cold cement floor and smoked an entire pack of cheap cigarettes. The embers glowed and faded in the dark, like my crumbling self-worth. Just before dawn, I heard the lock turn. My head snapped up. Audrey stood in the doorway. Her hair was tangled, her left cheek badly swollen, her thin t-shirt torn at the collar, revealing a bruised shoulder underneath. She had escaped. The moment she saw me, her tears broke loose. She threw herself into my arms like a wounded animal, clinging to the back of my neck with both hands. Kyle. Kyle, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were following me. She was shaking as she cried, her tears falling heavy and hot onto my shoulder. I raised my rough, calloused hand, held it there in the air for a moment, then finally pulled her close. Does it hurt? I touched her swollen cheek, my voice so hoarse it barely sounded like mine. No. She shook her head hard and buried her face against my chest. Kyle, let's run away together. Let's leave and go somewhere no one knows us. I don't need a house. I just need you. Run away together. Such a romantic, naive idea. But the reality was that my bank account held less than $30,000, every cent Audrey and I had scraped together over 3 years, set aside for a down payment. In a city where even a modest apartment cost $2 million, $30,000 couldn't buy you a bathroom. I looked into Audrey's eyes, so full of hope, and felt an invisible hand squeeze my heart until I couldn't breathe. I couldn't run away with her. I couldn't let her spend her life hiding with me, slowly falling apart in the shadows of the city. She had once been the most radiant girl on campus. It was because of me that she had cut ties with her family and fallen into all of this. Audrey, give me 1 month. I took a deep breath, pushed down the ache rising in my chest, cupped her face in my hands, and said it slowly, word by word, 500,000. I'll figure it out. I promise I'll buy us our own place downtown. Audrey went still. She stared at me, a flicker of panic crossing her face. Kyle, don't do anything stupid. We can save up slowly. I'm not in a rush. I am. I raised my voice, my eyes red as I held her gaze. I'm done with the way your mother looks at me. I'm done letting you live somewhere the door won't even close all the way. I'm a man, Audrey. I won't let everyone look down on you because of me. The look in my eyes scared her. She opened her mouth but said nothing. She just held me tighter and cried even harder, with a kind of despair that broke something deep inside me. The next day, I went back to the construction site. The sun was merciless, like it wanted to peel the skin right off you. I was wearing a hard hat, weaving through a jungle of steel and concrete. I'm a civil engineer, sounds like a respectable white-collar job, but on the job site, I was basically a glorified errand boy. Kyle, this rebar shipment has the wrong grade. Kyle, the inspector is holding up the paperwork again. Kyle, Mr. Smith wants you in his office. I spun like a top, never stopping. Sweat dripped into my eyes and burned like hell. But I didn't even have time to wipe my face. Only one thought was running through my head, make money. At noon, I knocked on the project manager's office door. A wave of cold air hit me the moment I stepped inside, enough to make me shiver. Mr. Smith was kicked back in his leather executive chair, smoking an expensive cigarette, eyes fixed on the stock charts on his screen. Kyle. He didn't look up. What do you want? I swallowed hard and kept my voice low. Mr. Smith, I'd like to request a 6-month advance on my salary. His fingers stopped on the keyboard. He turned and looked me up and down, then let out a laugh. 6 months in advance? Kyle, you think this company runs a charity? You make $8,000 a month, that's $48,000. What are you putting up as collateral? I can work overtime. I can do the work of 2 people. Mr. Smith, I really need this money, please. I was sweating through everything I had on, practically ready to get down on my knees. Mr. Smith flicked his ash and gave me a look full of contempt. Kyle, having ambition is a fine thing in a young man. But you've got to crawl before you can walk. You think $500,000 is easy to come by? Don't think I don't know about the pressure Audrey's mother is putting on you. Let me give you some advice, don't bite off more than you can chew. That girl Audrey is a beautiful woman. She's wasting her time with you. Mr. Draven drives a Range Rover. How do you even think you compare? His words were like a dull blade, carving into me piece by piece. I don't know how I made it out of that office. The heat outside swallowed me whole again. I stood on an unfinished floor dozens of stories up and stared down at the city below me. Traffic flowed endlessly through the streets below, and towers of glass and steel stretched as far as the eye could see. This city held endless wealth and endless opportunity, but not a single inch of it belonged to me, Kyle. After work, I dragged my lead-heavy legs back to our rental apartment. Audrey had already made dinner. Nothing fancy. She was wearing that old faded t-shirt, her hair loosely pulled back, a bandage stuck to her forehead. You're home. Come on, she smiled at me, sweet and warm, but I could see the exhaustion hiding behind her eyes. I sat down, picked up my fork, and dug in. The food wasn't great, but I ate every bite like it was a feast. Kyle, I went to look at an apartment today. Audrey spoke up suddenly, her voice soft and careful. My fork froze midair. She pulled a crumpled flyer from her pocket and spread it flat on the table. Look, it's out in the west suburbs. Yeah, it's old and rough, 30 years old, top floor, no elevator. But the price is low, only $600,000. The down payment is just $180,000. We already have $30,000 saved. If I borrow a little from some friends and you pull together a bit more, we can make it work. Her eyes were shining. She pointed at the blurry floor plan on the flyer, excitedly laying out our future. It's only about 430 square feet, I know, but we could enclose the balcony to get more space, paint the walls that soft gray you like, find a nice secondhand couch on eBay. I watched her go on and on, my vision slowly blurring. A rundown low-rise in the suburbs. This was the bottom of the bottom, what she had settled for, just to make up for my failures. She could have been sipping afternoon tea in a luxury downtown high-rise. Instead, she was ready to go beg and borrow from people, all for a 430 square foot apartment. Stop. I cut her off. Kyle. Audrey froze. I said stop. I shoved back from the table and stood up, grabbed the flyer, tore it apart, and threw the pieces to the floor. I'd rather sell my blood, work myself into the ground, but I will never let you live in a dump like that. $500,000, not a cent less. I will buy us a place right in the downtown of this city. Audrey stared at the scraps of paper scattered across the floor, her eyes turning red. She didn't argue. She just quietly crouched down and picked up the pieces one by one, her voice breaking. Kyle, I just don't want you wearing yourself out. I really don't care where we live. But I do. I screamed at her like a wild animal. I care what people think of you. I care what your mom says about me behind her back. Do you get that? Audrey went silent. Her tears hit the floor, one drop after another. I watched her shoulders tremble and wanted to slap myself. I slammed the door and walked out into the thick black night. When you have nowhere left to turn, desperation turns you into a monster. I reached out to a contractor I knew from the construction site, a guy named Marcus Stone. Marcus didn't do legitimate work. He only handles off-the-books dirty work. Things like illegal demolition runs in condemned neighborhoods in the dead of night, or blasting in underground mines with zero safety measures. 500,000? Marcus blew out a long puff of smoke in the hazy pool hall and squinted at me. Kyle, you got some nerve. A job worth 500 grand is the kind you pay for with your life. As long as I get the money, my life doesn't matter. I stared him down, my eyes shot through with red. Marcus smiled, showing a row of yellowed teeth. All right, I can see you're the real deal. There's an abandoned chemical plant on the south side of town that needs to be torn down. Inside, there are a few large tanks still holding residual toxic gas. Legitimate demolition companies won't touch it, too risky, not enough profit. The owner is putting up 800,000, with a 3-day deadline. You take a few guys in, cut those tanks open. When it's done, I'll give you 500,000. I knew exactly what that meant. No protective suits. No gas masks. Just a cutting machine, going at iron tanks that once held deadly chemicals. One wrong spark. One explosion. One breath too many of toxic gas, and there'd be nothing left of you to bury. Fine. I'll take it. I didn't hesitate for a second. For those 3 days, I told Audrey the construction site was on a tight deadline, strict on-site management, no going home. I took 3 men who had nothing to lose, and we crept into that chemical plant like rats, into the sharp, stinging smell that hit you the moment you stepped inside. The temperature was over 40 degrees. The air was thick with a suffocating yellowish-green haze. Sparks flew from the cutting machine with every pass. Each cut felt like dancing on the edge of death's blade. On the first day, one of the workers inhaled too much toxic gas and collapsed inside one of the tanks, foaming at the mouth. We dragged him out. He was already gone. Marcus tossed his family $20,000 and called it settled. On the second day, my lungs felt like they were on fire. Every breath tasted like blood. My vision started blurring, and my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the cutting machine. But there was only one thought in my head, $500,000. With $500,000, I could throw the down payment right in Gloria's face. I could let Audrey walk down the aisle with her head held high. On the third night, the last tank finally came crashing down. I collapsed onto the ground, covered in oil and toxic sludge, and stared up at the black sky. Then I started laughing, loud, uncontrollable laughter. I'd made it out alive. I'd earned the $500,000. Marcus tossed a heavy black plastic bag in front of me. Kyle, you got the luck of the devil. Money's in there. Count it. I didn't count it. I clutched that bag like it was my life. I dragged my wrecked body back to our apartment that same night. When I pushed the door open, Audrey was slumped over the table, fast asleep. There was a bowl of oatmeal on the table, long gone cold. The noise woke her up with a jolt. The moment she saw me, she screamed. I was covered head to toe in black grime. My clothes were in shreds. My face was slashed with cuts. My eyes were so red they looked like they could bleed. My whole body reeked of chemicals that turned your stomach. Kyle. What happened to you? Don't scare me like this. Audrey rushed at me and threw her arms around me, not caring about the filth covering every inch of my body. I grinned, teeth showing, and shoved the black plastic bag into her arms. Audrey. I got it, $500,000, we've got the down payment. The moment those words left my mouth, everything went dark. I blacked out. The white of the ceiling was the first thing that returned to me, though it didn't look like white. It looked like a dirty, bruised gray, stained by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of a machine somewhere off to my right. Every breath I took felt like I was inhaling crushed glass. My chest didn't rise, it seized, tight and rigid, as if my ribs had been replaced by bands of rusted iron. He's awake, a voice murmured. It was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth that I turned my head. The motion sent a violent wave of nausea through my gut. A nurse in a faded blue scrub top was adjusting a drip. The air in the room smelled of sharp antiseptic and old floor wax, a scent that instantly made my throat contract. I tried to speak, to ask about the black plastic bag, to ask about Audrey, but all that came out was a wet, rattling cough that tore at the very bottom of my lungs. Don't try to talk, the nurse said, not looking at me. You got severe chemical inhalation. The doctor said it's a miracle your airway didn't melt completely. You're lucky to be breathing at all. The money. I managed to scrape the word out, my voice sounding like gravel being ground under a boot. My bag. Before the nurse could answer, the heavy door to the ward swung open. It wasn't Audrey. Gloria Brooks walked in, the heels of her designer shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum. She looked entirely out of place in the cramped, sterile ward, wearing a pristine beige trench coat with a silk scarf knotted perfectly around her neck. She looked down at me, her mouth twisting into an expression of profound disgust, as if she had just stepped on something wet in the street. Still breathing, I see, Gloria said, her voice dropping like a stone in the quiet room. You really are like a cockroach, Kyle. Hard to kill. Where is Audrey? I gasped, my fingers clawing at the coarse hospital sheet. The money. I have it. $500,000. On the table, Gloria let out a short, sharp laugh. She reached into her luxury handbag, pulled out a slim, elegant cigarette case, realized where she was, and snapped it shut. With a click. That filth-covered trash bag you brought home? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Do you think $500,000 is some kind of magic wand, you idiot? The police are already asking questions about that chemical plant. The contractor, Marcus, is in custody. That money is dirty, Kyle. If we touch it, the Brooks family goes down with you. She leaned over the guardrail of my bed, her face inches from mine. I could smell her expensive French perfume, a suffocating sweetness that made my scorched lungs ache. But more importantly, she whispered, do you have any idea what the treatment for your ruined lungs is going to cost? The doctor says you need specialized pulmonary reconstruction, experimental drug therapies. The deposit alone is $300,000. Without it, you'll be dead before the month is out. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, erratic beat. I'll work. I'll get it. With what? You can't even stand up, Gloria sneered. No. Audrey has made her choice. She's finally grown up, Kyle. She realized that staying with a dying broke loser who digs in toxic waste isn't a life. Tomorrow, she signs the papers. Silas Draven has already wired the $300,000 to the hospital's account. Your deposit is paid. The room seemed to tilt. The steady beep of the heart monitor beside me spiked into a frantic, high-pitched whine. No. I choked out. She wouldn't. Audrey, keep your voice down, Gloria snapped, straightening up and smoothing her coat. She's coming in to say her goodbyes. Don't make a scene. If you have even a shred of decency left in that miserable body of yours, you'll let her go. She came in 5 minutes later. She wasn't wearing the old, faded t-shirt anymore. She wore a dark blue woolen coat that looked too large for her, her hair brushed straight and falling over her shoulders, hiding the side of her face that had been bruised. But she didn't look like herself. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were empty, flat and dark, like water in a frozen well. She didn't run to my bedside. She didn't throw her arms around my neck. She stopped 3 paces away, her gloved hands clasped tightly in front of her. Audrey. I reached out a hand, my skin gray and peeling from the chemical exposure. Audrey, don't listen to her. We can go, we still have. She didn't look at my hand. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope that was the $30,000. Our 3 years of savings, the money we had kept in a metal tin under our floorboards, every dollar representing a meal skipped, an extra shift worked, a dream whispered in the dark. She tossed it onto the foot of my bed. The envelope landed with a soft, dull thud against my legs. We're even now, she said, her voice was steady. Too steady. It had a hollow, metallic ring to it, like she had rehearsed the words 100 times in an empty room. That I stared at the envelope, then up at her. What? The 30,000, she said, her gaze fixed on the wall just above my head. It's all the money we saved together. Take it. Use it to buy your apartment downtown, or use it to buy your coffin. I don't care anymore. Audrey. Look at me, I pleaded, my voice breaking as a sob tore through my chest, bringing with it the copper taste of blood. Why are you doing this? Look at me. I am looking at you, she said, her eyes finally dropping to meet mine. There was no warmth in them. No pain. Only a freezing, dead indifference that hurt worse than any physical blow I had ever taken. And all I see is a man who almost killed himself for a down payment. You think you're some kind of hero. Kyle. You're a fool. I told you I didn't care about the apartment, but the truth is, I did. I was just tired of living in a dump. I was tired of smelling like grease and sweat. I was tired of being poor. She took a step back toward the door, where Gloria was waiting in the shadows of the hallway. Silas Draven gave my mother a check without even blinking, Audrey said, her mouth twisting into a cold, beautiful smile that I didn't recognize. He didn't have to bleed for it. He didn't have to ruin his lungs. He just wrote his name on a piece of paper. That's real power, Kyle. That's what a real man can give a woman. Not $500,000 in a garbage bag. You're lying. I whispered, the tears finally spilling over my cheeks, hot and stinging against my scarred skin. You loved me, you said, we were young, and we were stupid. She cut me off. But I'm not stupid anymore. Don't look for me, Kyle. Don't call me. The next time you see my name, it'll be in the society papers. She turned around. The blue coat flared as she moved. Audrey. I screamed, a raw, animal sound that tore my throat open. I tried to fling myself out of the bed, but the plastic tubes anchored me, pulling taut and ripping the IVs from the back of my hand. Blood splashed onto the white sheets. She didn't look back. The door swung shut, the click of the latch sounding like the firing pin of a gun. I fell back onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling, my chest heaving as the alarms on the monitor shrieked into the empty room. That I didn't die in that bed, though there were many nights over the next year when I wished I had. The $300,000 Silas Draven had paid kept me alive. The experimental drugs rebuilt my lungs, but they left behind a permanent gift, a deep, raspy edge to my voice and a sharp, dry cough that returned every time the weather turned cold. When I was discharged, I had nothing. The $30,000 of our savings had been spent on the remaining hospital bills and the cheap, synthetic medicines I needed to survive the winter. That I left the southern city on a cargo train, huddled in the corner of a freezing metal car, wrapped in a thin blanket I had stolen from the ward. I had no destination. I only knew that I had to go north, far away from the heat, far away from the smell of the river and the memory of Audrey's laughter. I ended up in the iron ore fields of the northern border, a barren, frozen wasteland where the wind howled like a dying dog and the ground was as hard as granite. That it was a place where men went to disappear or die. That I worked as a heavy machinery mechanic, my hands constantly stained with black grease and frozen to the steel wrenches. Because of my engineering background, I understood the stress points of the massive drills better than the foreman. I didn't talk. I didn't drink with the others. I lived in a wooden shack that Shook in the blizzard, eating canned beans and saving every single dollar I made. The turning point came during my second winter. A massive collapse in Sector 4 trapped 12 miners 300 feet below the permafrost. The company's engineers declared the rescue shaft too dangerous to drill. The structural integrity of the surrounding rock was compromised, and any further drilling would cause a massive cave-in that would bury the men forever. The executives were ready to write them off as an insurance loss. I walked into the command trailer, my face covered in frost, and threw a set of handwritten calculations onto the table. "You're drilling from the wrong angle," I told the lead engineer, my voice raspy and low. "You're treating the permafrost as solid rock. It's not. It's an ice soil matrix. If you use thermal induction casing, you can stabilize the shaft long enough to pull them out." They laughed at me, a grease-stained mechanic with a scarred face, but Donald Vance, the primary shareholder of Vance Resources, happened to be in the trailer that day. He was an old man with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint. He had made his fortune by taking risks that made other men vomit with. Feared out, he looked at my calculations, then looked into my eyes. "What's your name, son?" he asked. "Kyle," I said. "Just Kyle. Do you guarantee this works?" "If it doesn't, I'll go down with the drill," I replied, my voice steady. I meant it. I had nothing to lose. I had died in that hospital bed 2 years ago. The man standing in the trailer was just a shell fueled by a dark, cold fire. Donald Vance nodded once. "Give him the rig." I spent 36 hours straight on the platform, the freezing wind ripping at my face, my lungs burning with every breath. I guided the massive drill down, adjusting the thermal casing inch by inch, ignoring the grinding groans of the shifting mountain around us. At 4 a.m. on the second day, the drill broke through. All 12 men were brought up alive. Donald Vance didn't just give me a bonus. He brought me into his office in the capital city, sat me down in a leather chair that smelled of old money, and pushed a contract across the desk. "You've got steel in your spine, Kyle," the old man said, lighting a cigar. "And you have an eye for structure that can't be taught. I'm starting a new infrastructure division in the Western Territories. High risk, high yield. I need a man who isn't afraid of the dark. I'll give you 5% equity to start. Show me what you can do." I took the pen. I didn't look at the salary. I only looked at the name of the company, Apex Crest Holdings. "I'll make you richer than you ever thought possible, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice dry. "But when the time comes, I want the authority to buy out any asset I choose. Without question." The old man laughed, the smoke curling around his silver head. "Deal." For the next 3 years, I became a demon that I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I bought up failing mines, redesigned their extraction layouts, and turned them into gold mines within months. I cut through corporate bureaucracy like a chainsaw, firing executives who had spent decades doing nothing and replacing them with hungry, desperate young men who looked like I used to look. That I didn't buy luxury cars. I didn't buy penthouses. Every dollar of dividend I earned went back into buying shares of Apex Crest. When Donald Vance passed away in his sleep during the spring of my 3rd year, he left his remaining shares to me in his will, with a simple note: "Finish the bridge, Kyle. Whatever it is you're building." At 28, I was the sole trustee and majority shareholder of a conglomerate worth over $4 billion. That I finally bought a suit. It was charcoal gray, tailored in London, costing more than I used to make in 3 years at the construction site. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror of my office in Chicago. The scars on my neck from the chemical plant were still there, hidden beneath the high silk collar of my shirt. My eyes were cold, surrounded by faint lines of exhaustion. "Leon," I called out. My assistant, a sharp-faced young man who had been with me for 2 years, stepped into the office, a tablet in his hand. "Sir?" "Get the private jet ready," I said, my voice raspy, the cold air of the office making my chest tighten slightly. "We're going south." The southern city hadn't changed, but I had. When my black Maybach rolled through the streets, the dirty river water splashing against the polished chrome wheels, I looked out the window at the familiar concrete overpasses and the half-finished high-rises I had built. Those. I had poured my sweat into the foundations of the city, and now I had come back to buy it. "Report," I said, not looking at Leon. Leon tapped his screen. "Silas Draven's company, Draven Maritime, is in severe financial distress, sir. They overextended during the port expansion 2 years ago. We've quietly bought up 80% of their outstanding debt through 3 of our shell companies. Technically, you are now his primary creditor." "And the Brooks family?" "Gloria Brooks' husband's real estate firm went bankrupt last winter. They've been surviving entirely on allowances from Silas Draven. But since Draven's cash flow dried up, they've been forced to mortgage their family home. We acquired That mortgage yesterday morning. I let out a slow, dry breath. The fire that had kept me warm in the northern snow was now a cold, steady ember in my gut. Where is Silas Draven now? He's hosting a private charity auction tonight at the Grand Regency, Sir Leon replied. He's trying to secure private investment to save his shipping line. Most of the local elite will be there, including Gloria Brooks. And Audrey? I asked, the name feeling heavy on my tongue, like an old coin. Leon hesitated. His fingers hovered over the screen, his face tightening slightly. We haven't been able to locate her at any of the Draven residences, sir, he said, his voice dropping. According to our public record search, she and Silas Draven were married 3 years ago, but her name hasn't appeared on any social registry or corporate filing in over 2 years. She's not on the guest list for tonight. I frowned, a sharp pain radiating from the center of my chest. Is she living abroad? We're still looking into it, Mr. Hill, Leon said quickly. But Silas Draven's security is tight around his personal matters. I'll have more details by tomorrow. It doesn't matter, I said, my voice hardening. She'll show up when her husband's empire starts to crumble. Prepare the car for tonight. I want to see the look on Silas's face when he realizes who holds his leash. The ballroom of the Grand Regency was a sea of glittering crystal and expensive silk. I stood near the balcony, a glass of mineral water in my hand. I didn't drink alcohol anymore. It made my breath too shallow. Watching the crowd, Silas Draven was in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of older men in tuxedos. He was 50 now, his hair dyed black, his face puffy from years of expensive wine and easy living. He looked confident, but I could see the sweat glistening on his temples, the slight tremor in his hand as he held his champagne flute. Gloria Brooks was nearby, draped in a lavender silk gown that looked a season too old, her neck covered in a diamond necklace that I recognized from the Draven family collection. She was laughing too loudly, trying too hard to project the image of a wealthy matriarch. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice boomed over the speakers, calling the room to order that I didn't listen to the bidding. I waited. When the main charity lot, a rare oil painting donated by Draven Maritime, was put up, Silas stood up to speak. This piece represents the resilience of our city, Silas said, his voice carrying the smooth, practiced tone of a man who had never known a hard day's labor. And as Draven Maritime expands our horizons with our new port project, we hope to bring that same resilience to our investors. The port project is dead, Mr. Draven. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs of the ballroom like a steel blade. The crowd went silent. Heads turned as I stepped out from the shadow of the balcony, my cane tapping softly against the polished marble floor. The tailored charcoal suit fit me perfectly, the silver handle of my cane catching the light of the chandeliers. Silas Draven squinted at me, his brow furrowing. Who are you? This is a private event. My name is Kyle Hill, I said, my voice raspy, echoing in the quiet room. I am the chairman of Apex Crest Holdings. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The name of Apex Crest was legendary, a northern colossus that had been quietly buying up the city's debts for months. That I saw Gloria Brooks freeze. She stared at me, her eyes widening, her hand flying to her mouth. Her face turned the color of chalk, the champagne glass in her hand tilting until the pale liquid spilled over her manicured fingers. Kyle, she whispered, her voice cracking that I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Silas Draven. Your primary creditors, Union Capital and Crestway Finance, sold their debt portfolios to us this afternoon, I said, taking another step forward. You owe Apex Crest $84 million, Mr. Draven. The payment was due at 5 o'clock today. We have filed for foreclosure on your shipping terminals in the Eastern Harbor. Silas's face went purple. You can't do that. That's illegal. I have an agreement with the board answers to the debt holders. I cut him off, my voice cold and flat. And right now, I am the only debt holder that matters. You have 48 hours to vacate your offices, Silas. I'm taking the ships. I'm taking the land. And I'm taking your name off the building. You piece of trash. Gloria screamed, suddenly breaking through the crowd, her lavender gown rustling loudly. You dirty construction worker. How dare you come here and threaten us? Silas, call security. Have this thug thrown out. I finally turned my head to look at her. She looked older. The wrinkles around her eyes were deep, hidden beneath thick layers of makeup that were beginning to crack in the heat of the room. Hello, Gloria, I said softly. The mortgage on your house in the hills? I bought that too. You have until Monday to pack your bags. I'd suggest finding a smaller place. Maybe a rundown studio apartment in the old district. I hear the Ceiling fans are very drafty. You monster. Gloria gasped, clutching her chest, looking as if she were about to faint. Silas Draven rushed forward, his fists clenched, his face distorted with rage. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? It was never yours, Silas, I said, turning my back on him. It was just borrowed. And now the owner has come to collect. As I walked toward the exit, my cane tapping out a slow, steady rhythm, Leon hurried to my side. He looked pale, his phone held tightly in his hand. Mr. Hill, he whispered, his voice trembling. We found her. I stopped. My chest tightened, a sharp, familiar ache blooming behind my ribs. Where? It's not what we expected, sir, Leon said, his eyes filled with a strange, dark pity. You need to see this for yourself. The rain had started, a cold, heavy downpour that turned the southern cities' streets into black, shimmering mirrors. The Maybach stopped in an alleyway in the old industrial district, just 3 blocks away from the abandoned chemical plant where I had almost lost my life 3 years ago. The air here still smelled of sulfur, coal dust, and wet rot. Sir, are you sure you want to go in there? Leon asked, holding a black umbrella over my head as I stepped out of the car. The structural integrity of these tenements is very poor. It's dangerous. Stay here, I commanded. That I took the flashlight from him and walked down the narrow, concrete stairs that led into the basement level of a crumbling, 5-story tenement block. The walls were covered in green mold, the plaster peeling away in giant, wet flakes. Water dripped from the pipes overhead, splashing onto my expensive leather shoes. My cane clicked against the uneven concrete floor as I moved deeper into the dark. This was the kind of place where the city's poorest lived, the people who had been chewed up and spat out by the factories, the ones who couldn't even afford the rundown studio apartment Audrey and I had once shared. At the end of the long, leaking corridor, there was a flimsy wooden door. It was painted a faded blue, the wood warped and rotted at the bottom from the constant standing water. That I stood in front of it for a long time. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch the cold brass doorknob. 3 years ago, my door had been kicked open by people with cameras, stripping away my dignity. Now, I was the one standing on the outside. That I didn't knock. I pushed the door. That it wasn't even locked. The latch was broken, holding together only by a piece of rusty wire. The door swung open with a long, low creak. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, damp room. The smell hit me first, not the sweet perfume of the Grand Regency, but the smell of cold mold, wet cardboard, and the sharp, sour scent of cheap medicine. I in the corner of the room, on a mattress that lay directly on the damp concrete floor, a woman was huddled beneath a pile of thin, ragged blankets. She was sewing under the dim, flickering light of a single bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, threading a needle through cheap blue denim. Her hands were red, the knuckles swollen and cracked from the cold, her fingernails split and dirty. She stopped when the light hit her. She turned her head slowly, shielding her eyes with a thin, skeletal arm. Who is it? She whispered. Her voice was a rasp, thin and dry, like dry leaves scraping across concrete. My heart stopped, the flashlight in my hand shook, the beam dancing across the room, illuminating her face. It was Audrey, but it wasn't the Audrey of my dreams, or even the Audrey of my nightmares. She was skin and bones. Her cheeks were deeply sunken, her collarbones projecting sharply against the collar of a thin, faded gray sweater that was full of holes. Her hair, which had once been so long and radiant, was short, chopped unevenly, and dry like straw. She looked 50. She looked like she was dying. Audrey. The name came out of my throat, not as a shout of anger, but as a broken, choked whisper. She froze, her eyes, which had been dull and vacant, suddenly widened as she looked past the bright light of the flashlight to the silhouette of the man standing in the doorway. Kyle, she breathed. She tried to scramble backward, her thin legs tangling in the blankets. In her panic, she knocked over a small wooden crate that served as a table. A metal bowl of thin, watery cabbage soup spilled across the concrete floor. No, don't look at me, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Go away, please, Kyle, go away, don't look at me like this. I took a step into the room, my cane heavy in my hand, my mind completely blank. This was the woman who had betrayed me for $300,000. This was the woman who had married a billionaire, who had thrown our savings at my feet and told me she was tired of being poor. Why was she here? Why was she living in a hole that was worse than the one we had shared? Where is Silas? I asked, my voice ground down to a raw whisper. Where is your luxury penthouse? Your Porsche? Your diamonds? She didn't answer. She just wept, her small, thin body shaking so hard I thought her bones would break through her skin, and then, I heard a sound. It was a soft, wet cough, coming from the corner of the room, behind the Mattress that I turned the flashlight beam toward the sound. There, tucked into a small cardboard box lined with old, clean sweaters, was a child that he was about 2 years old, wearing a oversized blue wool hat that covered his ears. He had just woken up, his small fists rubbing at his eyes as he looked up into the bright light of my flashlight. That he didn't cry. He just blinked, his eyes dark, intense, and deep, eyes that were framed by long, thick eyelashes, looking exactly like the reflection I saw in the mirror every single morning. That MY reflection, that MY eyes. The flashlight slipped from my fingers, landing with a dull thud on the wet concrete floor, its beam rolling until it illuminated the child's small box. That I fell to my knees, my cane clattering beside me. I didn't care about the dampness soaking through my expensive trousers, or the dirt that stained my hands as I crawled toward the box. Kyle, no. Don't touch him. Audrey suddenly threw herself forward, her thin arms wrapping around the cardboard box, shielding the child with her own body. She looked like a wild, starving animal protecting her cub, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and fierce defiance. He's mine, she screamed, her voice cracking. He has nothing to do with you. Go back to your billions, go back to your high life. Leave us alone. The child, startled by his mother's screams, began to cry, a soft, weak wail that sounded like he didn't have the strength to make a louder sound. Audrey. My voice was shaking, completely out of my control. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches from her shoulder, but I didn't dare touch her. She was so thin, so fragile, it felt like she would turn to dust if I pressed too hard. Whose child is this? He's mine. She sobbed, her head pressed against the cardboard edge. He's just mine. Look at his eyes, Audrey. I roared, the anger finally breaking through the shock, though it was an anger born of sheer, terrifying confusion. Look at him. He has my eyes. He has my face. When was he born? She didn't answer. She just squeezed her eyes shut, her tears dripping onto the child's blue hat. When was he born, Audrey? I demanded, grabbing her by her thin, bony wrists. The skin of her arms felt like paper over dry twigs. August. She whispered, her strength suddenly leaving her. Her head fell forward against my chest, her forehead pressing into the expensive fabric of my suit. August, 2 years ago, August. 9 months after the night the door was kicked open. 9 months after the night I had taken her in that cramped, damp rental room, trying to use the heat of our bodies to fight off the coldness of the world. That he was my son. Why? I choked out, my chest seizing, the old chemical scars in my lungs burning like hot coals. If he's my son, why are you here? Why did you marry Silas? Why did you tell me you hated me? Audrey let out a long, shuddering breath, her body going limp in my arms. Because if I didn't, she whispered, her voice fading into the damp air of the basement, you would have died in that hospital, Kyle. And Silas would have killed you anyway. The story came out in broken, breathless fragments, interspersed with Audrey's dry coughs and the steady, quiet dripping of the basement pipes. When you collapsed that night, Audrey said, her eyes fixed on the dirty floor. The doctors said your lungs were failing. They said you had inhaled a highly toxic industrial gas that was eating away at your tissue. The only thing that could save you was an imported membrane oxygenation treatment. It cost $300,000. She let out a bitter, cold laugh that sounded exactly like the wind in the northern iron fields. The $500,000 you brought home? My mother took it the moment you passed out. She said it was repayment for the shame you had brought on our family. She refused to spend a single cent of it on your hospital bills. She said it was better if you died, so I could finally marry Silas and save my father's business. I clenched my fists so hard my fingernails bit into my palms, drawing blood. That money. I nearly died for it, I know, she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch my hand, then drawing back as if she remembered who I was now, the billionaire chairman, not the grease-stained boy she used to love. I went to my mother on my knees. I begged her. I screamed. But she wouldn't give me the money. She had already locked it in a private vault. So you went to Silas, I said, the realization settling into my stomach like a block of ice. I had no choice, Audrey said, her tears silent now, dry trails on her pale cheeks. You were on a ventilator. The doctor said you had 12 hours left before your organs failed. Silas knew how desperate I was. He offered me a deal. He would wire the $300,000 directly to the hospital's accounts, but only on 2 conditions. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. First, I had to marry him the very next day. Second, I had to make sure you hated me. He said if you ever tried to find me, or if you ever came near his Family again, he would use his influence to have your medical equipment turned off while you slept. He told me he could make a construction worker's death look like a natural complication of chemical poisoning, and no one would ever ask a single question. My breath hitched. The memory of her standing in that hospital ward, throwing the $30,000 at my feet, returned with a sickening, crushing force. Where even now, I was tired of living in a dump. I was tired of being poor. She had said those words to save my life. She had worn that cold, arrogant mask so that I would leave the city, so that I would stay away from Silas Draven's reach, so that I would live. And the marriage? I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rain outside. Silas didn't want a wife, Audrey said, her voice dropping to a whisper of pure horror. He wanted a trophy to humiliate you. The moment we were married, he realized I was already pregnant. He knew it wasn't his. He was furious. He beat me, Kyle. He locked me in the cellar of his estate. My mother knew, but she didn't care. She told me to bear it, to keep the Draven family money flowing. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing old, faded cigarette burns and long, jagged scars across her forearms. When the baby was born, she continued, her voice trembling, Silas saw his eyes. He saw they were yours. He threw me out of the house in the middle of the night, in the winter, with nothing but the clothes on my back. He told me if I ever told anyone the truth, or if I ever tried to contact you, he would have the child drowned in the river. She looked around the damp, moldy basement. My mother refused to take me back. She said I was a ruined woman, a piece of used garbage that had lost them their connection to the Draven fortune. So I came here. I'd been sewing cheap jeans for a local sweatshop for 3 years, making $10 a day, just to buy his milk and medicine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper that it was the flyer she had shown me 3 years ago, the rundown low-rise in the suburbs. The edges were torn, the paper yellowed and soft from the dampness, but she had kept it. I wanted to go there, she whispered, her voice breaking. I wanted to save up enough to buy us that 4,300 square foot place in the suburbs. I thought, maybe if I worked hard enough, one day I could buy it for our son. I wanted him to have a place where the door locked. A place where the rain didn't fall on his bed. I looked at the crumpled flyer, then at my son sleeping in his cardboard box. And finally at Audrey, the girl who had once been the most radiant student on campus, now reduced to a shadow, living in a tomb, all to keep my heart beating. A violent, shaking sob tore through my throat. I threw my arms around her, pulling her skeletal body tight against my chest. I didn't care about the dirt, the smell, or the billions of dollars I had in the bank. I only cared about the warmth of her body, which was fading, cold like the world outside. I'm sorry. I wept, my face buried in her short, dry hair. I'm so sorry. Audrey. I didn't know. I spent 3 years hating you. I spent 3 years wanting to destroy you. She didn't fight me this time. Her thin arms slowly came up, wrapping around my neck, her grip surprisingly tight, as if she were a drowning woman who had finally found a piece of timber in the storm. You're alive, she whispered, her tears warm against my neck. That's all that matters, Kyle. You're alive. Leon. I roared, my voice echoing through the damp corridor as I carried Audrey in my arms, her head resting weakly against my shoulder. My assistant rushed down the stairs, his umbrella forgotten, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the state of the woman in my arms and the cardboard box I had tucked under my other arm, where my son was quiet, his dark eyes staring at the strange new world. Mr. Hill. Leon gasped. What? Call Dr. Evans, I commanded, my voice cold, hard, and sharp as ice. Tell him to prepare the private wing at St. Jude's Hospital. I want the best pulmonary specialists, the best nutritionists, and the best pediatricians in the country. They're in 20 minutes. If anyone asks questions, tell them they work for Apex Crest now. Yes, sir. Leon didn't hesitate. He immediately began dialing as he opened the door of the Maybach that I placed Audrey gently onto the leather seat, wrapping her in the soft cashmere blanket that lay on the armrest. I placed our son beside her, his small hand immediately reaching out to grab her thumb. I turned back to the tenement stairs, my cane striking the wet pavement with a sound like a pistol shot. Leon, I said, not looking back. Sir. Tell our legal team to initiate the immediate seizure of all Draven maritime assets. Every dock, every ship, every office. I want them padlocked by midnight. And call the city's building inspector. Tell him the Brooks family residence has 48 structural violations. I want the electricity and water cut off by dawn. Consider it done, Mr. Hill, Leon said, his voice grim. And one more thing, I said, my hand tightening on the silver handle of my cane. Until my knuckles turned white. Find out where Silas Draven's creditors are. Meeting tomorrow. I want to attend. The boardroom of the Grand Regency was filled with the smell of expensive coffee and stale panic. Silas Draven sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his tie loosened, his face pale and sweat-stained. Gloria Brooks sat behind him, her hands trembling, as she clutched her designer handbag, looking like a ghost in the morning light. Gentlemen, please, Silas was saying, his voice cracking with desperation. If you can just give us a 30-day extension on the port bonds, we can restructure the debt. We have assets in the north. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom were pushed open that I walked in that I wasn't wearing my coat today. I wore a simple black suit, my white shirt open. At the collar, my cane tapping a slow, deliberate beat against the carpet. Behind me stood 6 lawyers in dark suits, their arms full of thick, blue-bound folders. Silas froze. Gloria stood up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. Kyle Hill. Silas gasped, his hands slamming onto the table. You have no right to be here. This is a closed meeting of Draven Maritime's board. There is no Draven Maritime board anymore, Silas, I said, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table. My lawyers immediately distributed the folders to the other board members, who opened them and began to whisper in hurried, panicked tones. What is this? One of the elderly board members asked, his face turning pale. Apex Crest has acquired 92% of our common stock. How is this possible? Because your company was built on dry sand, I said, my voice raspy and low, carrying a weight that silenced the room. And I bought the water that's washing it away. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Draven Maritime is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Crest Holdings. I am now the sole director. You can't do this. Gloria screamed, her voice rising to a shriek that rattled the crystal chandelier. Silas is a Draven. We are the Brooks family. You are just a filthy laborer. A peasant who worked on our site. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The site you're talking about, Gloria? I said softly. I bought that too. The development company that hired me 3 years ago. I acquired their parent company last month. And that $500,000 you stole from my hospital bed? I waved my hand. One of my lawyers stepped forward, placing a thick, black leather folder in front of Gloria. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were copies of bank transfers, offshore routing numbers, and signed affidavits from Marcus Stone, the contractor who had paid me for the chemical demolition. Marcus Stone didn't just go to jail, I said, leaning forward. He talked. He told the federal prosecutors about the illegal payoffs he made to your husband's firm to cover up the toxic waste on the south side. And he told them about the $500,000 in cash that you deposited into your personal account the morning after I collapsed. Gloria's breath hitched. She looked at the affidavits, her face turning an ash gray color. That's money laundering, Gloria, I said, my voice flat. And since the money came from an illegal demolition that resulted in the death of a worker, the federal authorities have classified it as racketeering. The warrant for your arrest was signed an hour ago. The marshals are waiting downstairs. No. Gloria sobbed, her handbag slipping from her fingers, spilling its contents across the expensive carpet. No, please. Kyle, we were family. Audrey loved you, don't you dare say her name, I hissed, my voice dropping to a dangerous freezing register that made Silas Draven shrink back in his chair. You let her rot in a basement. You let my son sleep in a cardboard box while you wore diamonds paid for with my blood. You are not her mother. You are just a parasite that has finally run out of blood to drink. The doors opened, and 2 federal marshals in dark windbreakers stepped into the room. Gloria Brooks, one of them asked, his badge gleaming in the fluorescent light. Gloria didn't fight. She let them lead her out, her expensive lavender coat dragging on the floor, her tears smudging the thick mascara until she looked like a broken doll. That I turned my eyes back to Silas Draven. He was shaking. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Kyle, please, he whispered, his hands flat on the table in a gesture of absolute surrender. I didn't know. I didn't know about the kid. I didn't know she was living in that basement. I'll give you whatever you want. The company, the land, the house. Just don't send me to jail. Oh, you're not going to jail, Silas, I said, a cold, slow smile spreading across my face. Jail is too warm. Jail has 3 meals a day and a roof that doesn't leak. I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. I've spent the last 12 hours buying up every personal debt you have. I said, looking down at him. Your yachts, your penthouses, your art collection, they've all been repossessed. You have nothing left but the clothes you're wearing. And since you violated the terms of your marriage contract by abusing Audrey, our legal team has filed for a complete division of assets. You owe her $40 million in restitution. I don't have $40 million. Silas screamed. Then you'll have to earn it, I said, my voice dry. I hear there's a chemical plant on the south side that's looking for manual laborers to clean out the old tanks. The pay is terrible, the hours are long, and the air, well, the air is very hard on the lungs. I turned and walked toward the door, my cane tapping out a final, triumphant rhythm. Have a good day, Silas. Your 48 hours start now. The private wing of St. Jude's Hospital was quiet, filled with the soft, warm light of the afternoon sun. The room didn't smell of antiseptic or old wax. It smelled of fresh lilies and warm rain. Audrey was sitting up in the large, comfortable bed, her face finally showing some color, her short hair washed and brushed soft. She was wearing a cream-colored silk gown that looked beautiful against her pale skin. Beside her, on the bed, our son was asleep, his small hand still clutching her finger. He was wearing a clean, soft yellow onesie, his breath deep and regular. No longer interrupted by that dry, rattling cough, the door opened softly that I walked in, leaving my cane by the door. I didn't need it as much today. The air in this room felt clean, filling my lungs without that sharp, familiar burn. Audrey looked up, her eyes bright, her mouth curving into a small, tentative smile, the same smile she had given me 3 years ago in that rundown studio apartment when she showed me the flyer. You're back, she whispered. I'm back, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her other hand. Her fingers were still rough, the scars still there, but they were warm now. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I replied. Your mother is in custody. Silas is gone. They will never touch you again, Audrey. They will never touch our son. She looked down at the sleeping child, a tear slipping from her eye and landing on his soft cheek. This time, it wasn't a tear of despair. What do we do now, Kyle? She asked. We have all this money, we have all these houses, but I don't know how to live in a mansion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the flyer she had kept, the rundown, 4,300 square foot place in the west suburbs, 30 years old, top floor, no elevator. I smoothed it out on the blanket, pointing at the blurry floor plan. I bought this building yesterday, I said, my voice soft and raspy, but full of a warmth that had been missing for 3 long years. We're going to tear down the walls. We're going to paint them that soft gray you like. We're going to put a nice second-hand couch on the balcony, and we're going to watch the sunset from the top floor. Audrey looked at the flyer, then up at me, her eyes shining like broken fragments of glass, but this time, the glass was whole, reflecting the light of a new day. But there's no elevator, Kyle, she whispered, her voice caught between a laugh and a sob. Your lungs. I don't need an elevator, I said, leaning forward to press my forehead against hers, the heat of our bodies finally fighting off the coldness of the world outside. I have you. And I have him. I can climb any mountain in the world.